Hey there folks, welcome back for module 6 of the CompTIA A course. This module is called Supporting Network Services. Now today's module has 3 main sections, and like I've said before, these main sections don't necessarily tell us exactly what's going to be in this module. If you'd like a more accurate idea of what's going to be in this module, that you can find in the video description down below. Are very clearly labeled. Majority of the topics, maybe not exactly all of them, but majority of the main topics have been labeled for you guys, and I've even put some nice timestamps there for you guys so you guys can jump to those topics very quickly and easily if you are looking for something specific. Now, as for the main 3 sections we're going to be diving into, the first one will be services provided by networked hosts. Second topic or section will be internet and embedded appliances, followed by the last and the third main section in this module, which is troubleshoot networks. Well, folks, there you have it. That is the 3 main sections we're going to be covering in this module. I've also kind of labeled them out in the video description down below, so you guys can find that. So before we jump into that first section, like usual, if you guys haven't done it already, please do your homie a favor here and give this video a like. It really does help me out. And of course, if you'd like to know when Module 7 comes out or any other course or video, then, well, you need to subscribe. Otherwise, you may or may not miss that. Okay, and on that note, let's dive into that first main section, which is services provided by networked hosts. The very first topic we're going to be looking at in this specific main section will be web servers. Now, I'm sure at some point in time, the majority of you would have heard this word being flinged around, web servers here, web servers there, but a lot of people don't even know exactly what it is. So I think some people associate this probably with websites, which is not entirely wrong. I mean, a web server does host websites. That's actually one of the things it does. So a web server could be an actual physical or virtual server that's actually on premises in your building. This could be your office building. Or, which is actually the more common scenario, it could be some server somewhere else in the world, anywhere in the world, quite frankly, and you are renting space on that server, or you're renting a service from that server, and you're going to be paying that provider a fee, a monthly fee in most cases, for the services they're rendering for you. So you are then going to go and upload your website to that entity's servers, and they will host it for you. Some of these entities will charge you a fee based on how many users you've got on this website. Others will just charge you a flat out fixed fee for the hosting of that website. Some of these entities will give you lots of functions and features and tools you can go and use to manage your website. Other ones, not so much. So I would say all in all, you should probably go and shop around if you plan on hosting some sort of website online, guys. So what can we say? What is web servers used for? Well, in a nutshell, it's used for websites and web applications. You'll find when the average Joe, like me and you, try to access some sort of website online using, of course, a web browser, you'll find in the beginning of the address bar, it normally says HTTP. So that is short, of course, for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. So that means you are browsing in clear text, folks. So if you are browsing on some sort of website and you do not want some scoundrel out there in the world seeing what you're doing, then you should probably not be browsing HTTP. So if there's some sort of man in the middle and he or she or it is trying to see what you're doing online, maybe you are logging into something which is very secure, very sensitive in nature, and you do not want this scoundrel, it's up to no good, to see your username or your password or whatever it is you're typing, you should probably not be using HTTP. Now, what should you be using? We'll tell you that in just a second. Now, HTTP, guys, uses the port 80. So there's over 65,000 port numbers on the average computer and server and firewall. And web browsing, normal web browsing that is, uses port 80. You can think of that as the doorway or the window the average machine or mechanism uses to access web pages. It's port 80, guys. So it's open by default, but if you don't use web browsing, it is advisable, of course, to go and close that port. Otherwise, people out there, it's up to no good, will take advantage of it, of course. Now, as for what can you use if you don't want someone to be able to keep an eye on what you're doing, well, guys, you can go and use HTTPS. Yes, that's right, It's got an S at the back. That's the only real difference in the actual naming. It's an S. The S stands for secure. The full name is Hypertext Transfer Protocol Secure. This is encrypted web browsing that you're doing. You'll find that a lot of websites does this automatically without you even forcing it along. So if you go to any form of banking website these days, shopping website, any of those websites really, you're going to find that website address is normally going to start with HTTPS. That means it's encrypted. So if any weasel out there and his uncle wants to see what you're doing, well, guys, they're not going to be able to now. They're just going to be able to see ones and zeros, all kinds of weird ciphertext. It's effectively useless information to those folks, and that's what we want. So that is why banking websites use this, because, well, we don't want other people out there to get your banking information. As for the port number, guys, it's not port 80. That's for normal HTTP. Hypertext Transfer Protocol, secure, or let's just call it HTTPS for short, it uses port 443. So whenever you see port 443, that's encrypted web browsing. Whenever you see port 80, that's normal clear text web browsing. And just to add on to this, because I didn't actually see it in the course, just for interest's sake, just for kicks and gags, HTTP actually also uses port 8080. So it's not just 80, it's 8080. So it's 80 and then another 80 behind that. 8080. All right, now moving on to our next topic here, mailbox servers. The very first thing I'm going to mention here is this is not as big of a headache as it used to be. As recently as 5 to 10 years ago, guys, this used to be a huge thorn in my side. And I think the same can be said for probably many of you guys if you ever had the opportunity to play in the field yet. So up until as recently as 5 years ago, you would have to go through the excruciating process of going to each and every user in your company or wherever you're doing this, and you would have to set that person's mail up. So there's a bit of a picture obviously there on the screen for you guys. You'd have to type in the person's display name, and that's easy enough. Type in their email address, which is easy enough. And now comes the kicker. You need to try and figure out what is the incoming mail server and what is the outgoing mail server. Now, if this is a home user or a very, very small home office environment, it's probably going to be some sort of mail server that they've got with their ISP. Now you need to try and get that from them. So the user is probably going to have no idea what you're talking about when you ask them for this information. So now you need to come and contact the user's ISP. Good luck trying to get a hold of their ISP because the user doesn't even know who their ISP is half the time. So you can see this starts getting very complicated very freaking quickly. It doesn't stop there, folks. You also need to go and configure a couple of port numbers and stuff in the background quite often, which is also going to just complicate things more often. And if you look there at the bottom of the picture, you'll see it asks for a username and a password. Seems easy enough, doesn't it? Now, good luck asking the user for that. Even though it's the user's username and password, more often than not, they're going to have no idea what those credentials are. It's just really, really inconvenient. Now, at this point in time, I'm sure you guys have realized that 9 out of 10 companies are using Office 365 as their email. Now, when it comes to Office 365, even that you had to go and configure manually like this to a certain extent. It wasn't as complicated as this, but you did need to go and configure it manually. Now, these days, you've probably seen everything is becoming remote, everything is becoming virtual, and everything is moving into the cloud. So up until about 5 years ago, it wasn't the worst issue because if someone needed this to be configured, the biggest issue was just getting a hold of their details. But you could do this remotely for them. So you could be sitting in the office, remote connect to the user in question's machine, and you just go and configure it. Where it became a bit of an issue for me, a thorn on my side once more, is if these folks wanted you to go and configure it on their cell phones or tablets. Because most people want their work email on their phones. That is not exactly something you can normally go and remote connect to with your computer now, is it? So I had to go and drive out many, many, many miles or kilometers to get to these users, very, very far, only to go and configure one person's phone for their work email. You can only imagine how annoying that must have been. So fortunately for us now, all the email services that most companies use these days, and even personal users, they don't really require us to go and configure this kinds of stuff. If you look at something like Office 365, which is what we're going to be using 90% of the time, you just need to type in a display name, the person's email address, kind of like what you guys see there in a picture. You don't need to worry about incoming and outgoing mail servers. You don't need to worry about that. You just type the person's username and password, which is normally their work email address and password. And well, guys, that is it. And the same goes for their cell phones and tablets. So, in other words, the user doesn't actually need our technical support anymore. Any willy-nilly and his uncle can go and open Outlook for the very first time, say, hey, I want to add an account. It normally asks you automatically the first time you open Outlook. They just type in their name, their email, their password, and that is it. As easy as that. A child can do it. And I mean that in a literal sense because my 6-year-old can actually do this, and he has, in fact, done this. Not because he's a genius or anything. I'm not demoting my child or anything, but really, it is that easy, folks. And if you look at other email providers as well, like your free email providers like Gmail and those kinds of entities, same thing. We used to have to go and configure the incoming and the outgoing and all that. Nowadays, guys, no, you don't need to. You just type in the display name, the email, the password, because the email is the username, and that is it. It is really that simple, guys. Now, moving on to our next topic here: authentication, authorization, and accounting. First of all, this is most commonly known as the AAA, AAA, and this can actually be more than one thing, but let's start at the very beginning. Authentication. Let's explain what that is. So, for those of you that don't know what authentication is, that is effectively when someone or something needs to prove they are who or what they claim to be. So, if I am the person that needs to log on to something or into something, I will basically effectively be proving I am indeed the owner to this account, or I am indeed the owner to this device that I'm logging into. How is this done? Well, there's like a million ways of doing it, but there's three main categories we normally work with. So this could be to prove that you are, who you claim to be by showing something you know. This could be a password or a PIN combined with a username. This could be something that you have physically on your person, like a bank card, smart card, thumb. It could even be a phone. You might say phone. Yes, your phone, because the phone receives an OTP, which is a one-time PIN, or there's an app that you need to do some sort of acknowledgement on. Either way, the phone is seen as something that you or the entity has physically on their person. The third category is something that you are, which is normally biometric in nature. So this would be things like your fingerprint, retinal eye scan, voice recognition, facial recognition, all of those kinds of fancy stuff. So those are the three main categories, the most common categories, the most widely used categories, but they're most certainly, guys, not the only categories. So I'll mention them again. It could be something you know, it could be something you have, or it could be something that you are. But just for interest's sake, in case you're curious what some of these other ones might be, and keep in mind, it's not limited to the ones I'm mentioning, it could be somewhere you are. Yes, that's right. It's going to check where you physically are in the world. Or it could be something that you're currently doing at that present moment. Pretty nifty, right? Now let's move on to the middle one there, authorization. So that is to check effectively what level of access you or the user has with that account, basically privilege, once you have logged in and once you've been authenticated. So if I have just logged on, it might say, oh, you are a trainer. Oh, sorry, you only have access to slides and manuals and, well, pretty much whatever you would expect a trainer to have access to. Or it might say, oh, you are a manager. Or, oh, you are an IT administrator. You've got access to all the following. So authentication is to check if you are who you claim to be or what you claim to be. Authorization can be seen as step 2 that takes place after that, which is to check what level of access you have. Accounting, being the third one here, is basically just the fact that pretty much everything is logged these days. I mean, let's face it, there's nothing you can do on your local machine, a server, online, well, pretty much anywhere, without it being logged somewhere in some sort of manner. So absolutely everything you freaking do is logged, guys, and is tracked, guys. So when you log on of any form of user account, let's say it's a company account, that is logged. And you or anyone will be able to backtrack it afterwards and see exactly who logged on, when, and for how long, and what they were doing. Pretty scary, isn't it? Then, just to add on to this, we're actually done with this topic, but just to add on to this, since AAA is also used for other things, The AAA concept also is used in networks to reduce risk, people. Yes. So this consists of things like your supplicants, it consists of network access devices, and it consists of your AAA servers. So what's going to happen is if I have something like a laptop or a desktop and I'm logging in on this laptop or desktop, that request is going to go through my company network, assuming of course I am at my offices, and it's going to go through various devices. It's going to go through switches and routers, and eventually it's going to end up at some sort of server along the line, and that server is going to check if I am indeed who I claim to be. Now, what is possible, but it doesn't really happen, is these switches and devices that my request goes through. They could theoretically go and keep basically a copy of the directory, in a manner of speaking. So it can keep a copy of all the user accounts and the passwords and that kinds of jazz on the switch itself. So that means the request doesn't necessarily have to go all the way to the back to the server. So you might think, okay, well, that sounds pretty cool. Yes and no. So that would probably be quicker to get the job done, especially if you've got a very large network of many switches. Why not use the switches to lighten your load? Well, that poses a couple of drawbacks as well, in the form of security. Switches are not that secure sometimes, and well, if anyone knows what they're really doing, they can obviously go and compromise that switch and get a hold of those details. So what we end up doing is we just, well, say, you know what, let's just not have the switches keep these kinds of details, and the request would, at the end of the day, pass through these switches all the way to the back to the server. It's a bit unfortunate, but at the end of the day, guys, it is about your security, which is why we're kind of forced to go and do that. Our hand has been forced, as they say. Anyway, on that note, moving on, here we've got remote terminal access servers. Now, I'm sure you've all heard about the concept of remote connecting to something like a server or a computer or some sort of other network devices. Yes, that's right. So for those of you new in IT, we can't just connect to other computers or servers remotely and see what we're doing there. No, you can actually connect to other network devices as well. This can be a lot of things, but the most common ones we would normally connect to is things like switches or routers. Could potentially be something like a firewall as well and other things. Now, depending on what kind of brand of device you're connecting to and what the model is, the commands you use on there is going to differ day and night from one another. So just because I understand the concept and because I know how to connect to the device does not necessarily mean I will be able to configure the device or do what needs to be done once I have connected to it, because maybe I don't know the commands for that brand of device. So just to give you guys an example, maybe I am connecting to a Cisco router, and if I'm familiar with Cisco commands, I might be able to configure the Cisco router. And then tomorrow, I connect to an HP router or switch, and now I find myself not being familiar with the commands, so I'm going to have to resort to asking a friend or a colleague that I trust and that I know to do it for me. It's a bit of a predicament, but at the end of the day, that's what we can do. So when it comes to remote terminal access, there's of course a picture on the screen that you would have seen by now. We normally most commonly use something called PuTTY. Doesn't mean you're limited to that, but that's most commonly what we use to go and do this. You're not going to see a graphical interface, guys. So if you are thinking of a graphical interface, you're probably thinking of something like remote desktop, remote assistance, team viewer, AnyDesk. There's a couple other ones as well, VNC or VLC viewer. Can't remember the exact name right now, but there's a lot of those. That allows you to see real time what's going on the remote device. You can interact with the remote device, you can move the mouse, you can control the device. Now, when we say terminal access, it's basically a black screen, for lack of a better description. And you're going to have to know the commands to be able to configure that device. There's many ways of doing this. Now, under this specific topic, I see CompTIA has given us Telnet. That used to be very popular up until about 5 or 10 years ago. So Telnet is an unsecure remote terminal emulation. The reason why we don't use it is because, well, it's unsecure. It uses port 23, in case anyone is curious. Make sure you remember that for the exam, because they may or may not ask you that. Now, if we're not using Telnet anymore, what do we use? Well, guys, nowadays we use SSH. It's pretty much the same thing. It's just, well, an encrypted version of what we used to go and do. You'll find that almost everything these days that used to use Telnet is now using SSH. So it's a secure remote terminal emulation, and this one, unlike Telnet uses 23 as the port number. This one uses port 22. And the last one here, which I feel is kind of unrelated to the topic of terminal access, is remote desktop protocol. Now, yes, it is kind of like a terminal access, but this one is not command-based, guys. This one, unlike I mentioned in the very beginning of this topic, is a graphical interface. It's a GUI interface. So when you connect to someone's machine or someone's server, this is probably going to be your own machines or servers, it's going to ask you for a username and password, and once you've logged on, if anyone else was logged onto that machine, it generally kicks them off by default. It's not necessarily the case. I mean, this could be a server, and if it's a server, we can normally have multiple sessions at the same time. But by default, if there's someone logged on, it'll kick them off because by default, it only allows one remote desktop session. Unless, of course, you're using some sort of terminal scenario, which is the actual topic here. Then it could be more than one session that can be allowed. What port number does remote desktop use, you might ask? That, guys, would be a very long number. It is 3389. Make sure you remember that number as well for the exam, folks. Now, we are finally going to be moving on to our second main section in this module, guys. That would be Internet and Embedded Appliances. Ooh, fancy, fancy. Sounds very fancy, doesn't it? The first topic up that we've got in this section is, of course, proxy servers. Now, what is a proxy server? A lot of people have spoken about this. You might have heard about it at some point in time. But the fact of the matter is, less and less companies are actually using this these days. Simply because it's not as effective as other solutions out there. So you'll find this maybe in a very small home office environment. In other words, a very small company, if you want to call it something. But medium-sized companies, large-sized companies, they don't really use this because they've got better tools and methods to their disposal. So in a nutshell, it manages user access from local network to the internet or websites. So I can go and control what websites my staff or my users are able to visit. That sounds pretty cool now, doesn't it? Sounds very freaking useful. Now, the majority of companies out there would very often go and block certain websites for staff and their users. This would be social media websites like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. It'll be things like YouTube. It'll be inappropriate or unsavory websites like, Pirate Bay, of course. These are all blocked with reason. I mean, social media and YouTube is blocked because we want the staff to be working during working hours since we're paying them to work. And it's also because sometimes these platforms take up a lot of bandwidth, especially if you look at something like YouTube. Now, funny enough, you guys are on YouTube right now, and I'm hoping you guys are doing this in your own time and not during working hours. Not that I care, because at the end of the day, I like it when people watch my stuff. But that is the fact of the matter. So if people are going to be watching YouTube, especially if it's a lot of staff members at the company that does it at the same time, you are now putting strain on the company's WAN link. So for those employees that's actually legit doing work right now, that's not so nice, because if someone's on a telephone call right now, anything like that, the call's going to break up. For those of the people that are watching or checking their email, that's browsing and doing other day-to-day tasks, they're going to experience a very slow internet connection that's intermittent, on and off. Things are not going to want to load or download. It's just not nice, is what it is. Which is why companies block these sites to begin with. And of course, pirate websites are blocked. Well, I don't think I need to explain that because it's just downright illegal and it's not allowed. So proxy servers can apply content filtering and time restrictions. How about them apples, right? So I think to really help emphasize on this, and I'll show you guys in a moment where you can go and configure your proxy servers, I'm going to do a bit of a drawing right here. This is something new I'm trying. It's the second time I'm trying it on my channel. And the response has been quite positive. People like it when I draw on the slides or whatever presentation I'm doing. People seem to like that. So before I do that, a proxy server is something in the middle. I suppose I might as well start drawing at the bottom. So anyway, so if I am at home, we can imagine that circle there. Apologize for my ugly drawing, but I really don't care. So we can imagine for a moment that ugly drawing of a circle is you at home on your internet on your device. And we can imagine for a moment that this here on the right hand side, that little poofy cloud you guys see there on the right, that is the internet connection as we know it. Now if I'm at home on my own internet connection, I have what we call a direct connection to the internet, of course. No problemo. No restrictions whatsoever. So if I want to go to do Facebook, or if I want to go to YouTube, or if I want to go to some sort of unsavory website, I can do it because there's nothing that's going to block me. Now, that is not the case if we look at a company work environment. Of course not. So the company work environment, this is going to be a bit different. So I'm going to add a block here in the middle. You might ask, okay, well, what is that block? Well, that block, guys, is going to be our proxy server. So let me add a bit of a title there for you guys. Proxy. It's a proxy server. You can think of that as a man in the middle. It's kind of like a bouncer at the door. And this proxy server is going to go and check what websites your staff or users is trying to access. And if these users are trying to access any website that's not allowed by the company, the proxy server is going to detect that, or hopefully detect that, because they're not very effective at doing it, and it's going to hopefully block it. So let's go and add a couple of random websites here just to really emphasize this. So I'm going to go and add here at the bottom www.facebook.com. Let's make that neat. And let's say www.youtube.com. So there's two websites now in the proxy server that is blocked by the company, this fairy tale company that we're talking about. So now, if you have a user, let's use that same user here on the left. So if you've got that user that's going to try and access the internet, he or she has to go through the proxy server. At least that's the idea here. And that is going to allow them to get to the internet at the end of the day. If they try to access normal day-to-day websites, which is work-related or at least allowed by the company, that'll work just fine, like normal. But if they try to access any website which is not allowed by the company, which is basically on the naughty list, like those two URLs that I've just dropped there for you guys, that will be blocked. So every time the user tries to access the website, a proxy is going to say, whoa, whoa, hold up, back up, brah. Let me just quickly check what website you're trying to visit. Facebook, you say? No, buddy, that is not allowed. It's going to tell them, back up, go away. And it's not going to work, and they're going to basically get blocked. Now, one of the reasons why many companies don't really like using proxies, especially if you go look at the medium and large size companies, is because it's very, very easy to bypass this. You don't even need to be tech savvy. So if you've got 100 employees, at least 5 to 10 of them are going to be able to figure out how to bypass this proxy server. You can either go and bounce yourself off another proxy. So how that would work is, it's going to look something like that. You bounce yourself off another proxy. Or you can go through this proxy server like so and pretend to be something else. I can pretend to be on Google, hide my traffic in Google traffic. Meanwhile, I'm on Facebook. So when the proxy sees you coming through, it's going to see, or think at least, that you or the user are on Google. Meanwhile, the user is actually on Facebook. Very easy to do that. Lastly, you can go and encrypt your connection. Now, that might sound like rocket science to you guys, but it's not always as complicated as you might think. So that is actually the most commonly used method to bypass a proxy, mind you. So if you are using something like, let's say, Internet Explorer, a very old browser that nobody uses anymore, you can go and use good old-fashioned in-private browsing, which forces the browser to load web pages in HTTPS. Like I said earlier, HTTPS is what? Encrypted browsing, folks. So if you're going to be forcing your browser to load pages in encrypted browsing, the proxy server will not be able to see what website you're in. That means it's going to therefore allow you to go through. If you're using something like Google Chrome, I think it's called Incognito. Can't pronounce it, but I think that's what it's called. I think if you're using Mozilla Firefox, it'll probably be called private browsing. All of these browsers have got their own function. They call it something different, but they all have that function to force the browser to load a page in HTTPS, and if you use that, it will normally bypass the proxy. Now, some companies that have a proxy server are a little bit more clever than that. They will go and configure a group policy on the company's group policy side, and that policy is to go and disable that function in your browser. They will not necessarily block you from using your browser, no, because we do need our browsers to do legit work. They will just disable that function in your browser. So when you or the user tries to access a website, and you try and load a site in, well, that kind of function, that mode, it's not going to work. You're going to see the buttons actually, in fact, disabled. So I hope that makes a little bit more sense to you guys. Let me just clear this up for a moment. I'm going to just erase this quickly. Go back. Just clear up my mess. There we go. Nice and clean. So before we move on to the next topic, there's actually multiple places you can go and configure proxy server settings. So if you are going to be forced to use a proxy server, you need to type in the IP address of your company's proxy server. You can either go and open your good old-fashioned Internet Explorer, not that anyone's going to be doing that. You can go into your options, you can go there to your connections tab, or guys, you can go to control panel. Now here's a bit of a picture of me going into control panel. I've already gone into control panel. It's more of a screenshot of when I did go. I made the screenshots just before I started this training. So there's a screenshot. I went into control panel, and when I went into control panel, I went and clicked on the tile or the button that says network and internet. Once I clicked on network and internet, I went and clicked on the option where you can see in the screenshot it says internet options. It's got a little globe there. It looks like it's got a little checklist. So I go and click on internet options. Once you click on internet options, this is the menu you're going to be provided with, and it's essentially the exact same menu you will see if you open Internet Explorer, the web browser, and you go to options. It's going to show you the exact same menu we see right now. Now on this menu, we're not quite at the right place yet. You'll see there's a couple of tabs there at the top. We need to get to the tab that says connections. So in other words, it's going to look like that. Once you get to the connections tab, you still need to go to the right place. Way at the bottom right there, you'll see it says LAN settings. You need to go click there where it says LAN settings. This is what you're going to see. Not quite done yet. And then there at the bottom, you'll see it says Proxy Server. There's a little tick box there that's not ticked at the moment. You need to go and tick that box, and once you tick it, it's going to look like that. And you'll find mine already has an IP address in there because I was using this for something else, for another course. But by default, when you go there, it's actually going to be blank. You just need to go and type in the relevant IP address of your proxy server, and that is the server, of course, that you need to go through to get to the other side, to get to the internet. Not that we really have a choice, not that we want to, it's more that we have to, of course. Alrighty, let's move on finally to another topic in this module and in this section. That, guys, is spam gateways and unified threat management. Sounds very freaking complicated. And sometimes it might actually be to a certain extent, depending on how much experience you've got and how you look at this. So this is all about network security functions. I'm going to give you guys a list of a couple of things. It's obviously not limited to my list, but this is the things that CompTIA speaks about in the course. So these are going to be the ones I'm going to be talking about to you guys. But just keep in mind, in real life, it can, of course, be more than what I've specified in my list. So when we talk about network security functions, one of the first things that normally comes to mind is, of course, firewalls. Good old-fashioned firewalls. Firewalls are good. They're there to keep people in check. So it keeps bad people out. It keeps good people in. And if someone tries to access websites they're not supposed to, that's one way you can go and block it. If there's spam that's unwanted, you can block it. Quite frankly, almost everything I'm going to mention here is actually built into firewalls as well, mind you, come to think of it. So you get firewalls that's software-based. I think we did cover that in this course. If we have not yet, it will be covered on the course later. So you get software-based firewalls like the built-in one called the Windows Firewall. You can go and download or buy, third-party software-based firewalls. Or you can go and buy yourself a physical firewall. These are very, very expensive, guys. They come with their own operating systems. How much they cost you depends on the make and the model, of course, and what kind of functions they, of course, come with. So these firewalls, in a nutshell, can block and allow ports, block and allow services, block and allow websites, amongst many, many, many other things. One of the things a firewall can do, which is ironically one of our next topics, is intrusion detection systems. Not all firewalls come with this. You obviously pay extra for this, but it's able to basically monitor user behavior and stuff, for lack of a better description. So if it sees something funky going on your network, something out of the ordinary, something very weird, it's going to basically flag that and investigate it, or allow you or someone else to investigate it. So if someone logs on at ungodly weird hours, let's say this person normally works from 8 o'clock in the morning until 5 in the afternoon, and suddenly this person logs on at 5 o'clock in the morning, that's very suspicious behavior. So that is an intrusion detection system that's going to pick that up. It might even lock the account depending on how you've configured it. Any form of weird and out of the ordinary behavior, anomalies, I can't even pronounce that. That's basically what this bad boy is for. Then, of course, we've got your good old-fashioned antivirus and anti-malware solutions. Not sure why they say antivirus and anti-malware, because antivirus is part of anti-malware, in my honest opinion. So this includes your antivirus, anti-spam, anti-this, anti-that, really. Make sure you've got those. Spam gateways. Some companies have dedicated spam gateways, but if you've got a proper firewall, you might not need one because this function is actually built into firewalls. It's one of the many filters. Then you've got content filters. So that's kind of what a proxy server would do. So I suppose to a certain extent you can use a proxy server to do that, but it's not very effective at it. So I wouldn't recommend the proxy server unless you've got a very tight budget and very limited skill set, or your staff has got a very limited skill set. I would not recommend a proxy server. I would normally go and recommend get yourself a proper firewall. A proper firewall has this built in, and you can go and filter exactly what kind of content is allowed into your network and out of your network, and what your users can do. You can go and filter exactly which websites your company will be allowed to visit and which ones not, when they will be allowed to visit these websites and under what circumstances. So if your users are, for example, blocked from Facebook, you can block Facebook via the firewall. But you can go and configure it in such a way so that Facebook is actually allowed, let's say, in lunchtime. It actually unlocks it during lunchtime, and exactly when lunchtime is done, it locks it again. Yep, you can actually configure things like that, guys. Then we've got data leak or loss prevention systems. So there's all kinds of policies and systems and stuff that companies have these days which detect sensitive information or weird behavior. So if it sees data could potentially be leaked in some sort of way, these systems or policies would detect that and block it, or at the very least alert some sort of administrator or alert the user in question and tell them, hey, listen, my bra, you're about to share something not so nice, something very sensitive in a company. Are you sure you want to proceed? So it's up to you and your company to decide how you want to tackle this problem. If you trust your users, maybe just inform them that they are about to be in violation of some sort of policy or something. If you don't trust your users, like most companies, then maybe just outright block them and have them request permission first. Then we've got something called Unified Threat Management. I'm only mentioning it because I see it's a topic in the course. This, quite frankly, in my honest opinion, is just a firewall, guys. A firewall is a very good example of a UTM, a physical firewall. I've worked on many brands in my life. The most common brands I used to work on was Cyberm, which is nowadays called Sophos. And I've also worked on Palo Alto and quite a few other brands as well. But I think the most common brand of physical firewalls that I used to work on, which I'm qualified in, by the way, is Cyberm, which is nowadays known as Sophos. So it's a single appliance or gateway, if you want to call that performs multiple security functions. What does that sound like to you guys? It's a freaking firewall. That's why it sounds familiar, because it's exactly what I've been explaining to you guys all along. All right, moving on to our next topic here, legacy systems. So in this course, and quite frankly in IT in general, whenever you guys see the word legacy, it means something is old. So if I talk about old legacy hardware, I'm talking about old hardware that nobody uses anymore. So if we talk about hard drives, a legacy hard drive will be the old PATA hard drives, IDE ones that use those big ribbons. And the newer ones are obviously, of course, SATA. If we talk about legacy operating systems, that'll be an operating system like, for example, XP or Windows 7. They're considered legacy because, well, they don't have any support anymore and they've kind of reached their end of life. So that is legacy. If we talk about legacy software, it's software that's obviously now also no longer active or that's reached its end of life. So that's what the word legacy means. It's just a fancy, complicated way of saying something is very old and no longer being used. This could be because, it is no longer active, or it's just, well, depreciated. So legacy systems is something like a vendor that's no longer active. It's not limited to vendors, of course, guys. The product may or may not be depreciated. So the vendor has now possibly reached end of life. So if you look at something like Windows 7, there's no support for it whatsoever now. It doesn't mean Windows 7 is not going to work. It's just there's no support for it. It's now depreciated. So if you're going to run into some sort of issue, or you discover, or someone else discovers some sort of new security vulnerability in Windows 7, guess what? There's nothing you can do about it. Microsoft's not going to care what's going on there. They're not going to patch it. They're not going to give you an update for it. You're just going to have to deal with it. So that's another reason to always have the latest of the latest, and to make sure you always have the latest patches and updates of your operating system, assuming, of course, they still support your operating system. Legacy systems, unfortunately, have lack of support, like I said. There is no support. The risks are substantial if you look at legacy systems. An operating system is probably the best example I can give you guys. I'm going to keep referring to an operating system. It really is the best example I can give you guys. So if you look at an old operating system like Windows 7, I mean, I love Windows 7 as much as the next guy, but it's legacy. the risks is substantial. So it does not get patched, it does not get updated. So if any guy and his uncle is going to try and hack it or now or crack it now, there's nothing you can do about it. There's not going to be a patch. So if someone discovers what we call a 0-day exploit, that means it's a brand spanking new vulnerability. There's going to be no patches for that, guys. You're going to have to deal with it. So I can't believe I'm saying this, but get yourself on the latest operating system, whatever it is at this point in time when you're watching this module of mine. It's probably going to be Windows 11 by the time you guys are watching this module of mine. But whatever it might be, make sure you've got the latest operating system, the latest updates, and the latest patches. So yeah, that's all I can say for that. Moving on to the topic of Internet of Things. So very first thing you guys need to know about this is it's commonly known as IoT. Capital I, small o, capital T. IoT. So it's most commonly known as that by the short abbreviation. So whenever you see IoT, now you know what it means, guys. It stands for Internet of Things. Now, a lot of people have heard the term maybe, but they've got absolutely no idea what it actually is. This stuff is actually all around us, believe it or not. If you go to an ATM to go and withdraw money, in most cases you'll find a little operating system running there that dishes out your money or steals your money. That, guys, is Internet of Things. If you look at some of these new fancy fridges we get these days, for the people that can afford those fancy fridges, for the rich people, sometimes you can go browse the internet. Some of these really expensive fridges can even check what stock you've got in your fridge, and they can actually even order stock for you. Now that is Internet of Things. So Internet of Things could be control systems. I mean, heck, this could be a smart speaker, could be smartphone apps or web management. It could be smart device functions. Where I've seen what this is a very good example is also smart homes. So if you look at smart homes, once again, this is for the rich people. Some of the rich people, sounds funny when I say it like that, they've got smart homes where you can go and control certain aspects of your home using a remote or your cell phone, because we all have smartphones these days. So via your phone, for example, you might be able to control the lights, turn them on and off, or dim them or bright them. You might be able to open or close the curtains. You might be able to interact with your fridge via your phone. You might be able to interact with your TV via your phone. That is all Internet of Things. And you guys have probably seen by now, more and more things like that is starting to use Internet of Things. And we're not just talking about homes here. So, I mean, suddenly now we have got fridges that's got TV screens on them. That is Internet of Things. And that's going to become more and more common now. Nowadays, it's seen as a fancy luxury to have that. But probably in the next 5 to 10 years, that's going to be standard for everybody. So Internet of Things is here, and it is here to stay, and it's definitely going to grow. So if you find that interesting, I would say maybe go look at some sort of Internet of Things course online. Maybe you'll find something on YouTube, or possibly go and enroll yourself at an institution for one of those courses. Unfortunately, that's not a course I train. I will not be able to help you guys with an Internet of Things course. I don't have any plans of putting one of those on my channel, but maybe if there's enough demand, I'll go and look into it. It's not something I specialize in, so I'm not going to be able to help you guys the way I would like to help you guys. I like to give my viewers the right information and accurate information, and at this point in time, if I'm going to be delivering a course on that, I'm sure I will be able to do it, but the information is not going to be completely up to date, and it's not going to necessarily be enough to be able to get you guys to pass those exams. And I like to be able to get the guys to actually pass the exams in the end of the day. So I don't want to let you guys down on that sense. Now, let's move on to our last module here, the third module, which is Troubleshoot Networks. So in this section, the first thing we're going to be talking about is troubleshoot wired connectivity. Now, I think that speaks for itself. So when we say wired, that means there's a cable involved. So your laptop, desktop, or server, or whatever it is we're talking about, is connected to the network via a cable of sorts. It's most likely an Ethernet cable, and in the category of Ethernet, we know it's probably going to be a good old-fashioned LAN cable. If it's wireless, that's an entirely different topic. So if you or someone cannot connect for whatever reason in a wired network, obviously the very first thing we need to do is identify the problem. So we need to establish a theory, and then eventually we're going to test the theory. So in the sense of identifying the problem, I would say start at the beginning, and this is going to sound silly to you guys, but believe it or not, a lot of people make stupid, silly mistakes. So I would say check if the cable is plugged into the device. If it's a laptop or a desktop, let's keep this simple. check if it's actually plugged into the jack at the laptop or desktop. Check if that RJ45 connector is plugged into the RJ45 port on the laptop or desktop. For those of you that know what the connector is called, it's called an RJ45. Make sure it's plugged in. Make sure it's plugged in properly. Just because it looks like it's plugged in doesn't necessarily mean it's plugged in. You get a lot of users who will just jam it in there, but they don't actually make sure it's seated properly. Once you verify that the user's cable is plugged in properly at the device, follow the cable. Make sure you don't see any visible damage. Sometimes people will go and damage these cables. I've seen, especially at some office desks, a lot of people have these wheelie chairs and they'll go and roll back and forth over these chairs, and at the end of the day they damage the cable and it damages the copper inside the cable. So check for any visual signs that damage the cable. Follow the cable to the wall, because it's probably going to go into some sort of wall, and if you're lucky, it'll plug into the wall and not just go into the wall. If it plugs into the wall into some sort of wall box, then you're lucky, because that makes it very easy to go and fix the cable. I would say, you know what? Plug it out. If it doesn't want to work, plug another short cable in and see if that solves the problem. If it does, then there you go. Problem solved. Now, if it goes into the wall and it doesn't plug into the wall, that means the cable is going to actually go all the way into the wall, possibly into the roof, to some sort of switch or server room. And that means this cable is probably very long. And if that turns out to be the problem, let's say it is the cable, you're going to have to replace potentially the whole freaking cable, which could take a very long time, and it's going to be a lot of work. You want to potentially avoid that, which is why a lot of technicians, including myself, normally put a wall box by the wall, so that if and when the user inevitably breaks that cable, because let's face it, they are going to do that, you just need to replace that one small little section, which is just a couple of meters. So why not just do it that way? Instead of working harder, work smarter. So if that doesn't work, so if you're replacing the cable doesn't work, or you tested all of that, check if the switch is on. Check if the cable is plugged into the switch. So from the wall box all the way to the switch, check if it's plugged into the switch. If the cable just goes straight to the switch, check if it's plugged into the switch. Check if the switch is turned on. Check if that port on the switch is not maybe blown. So maybe plug it out of the port and plug into a different port in that switch. And just keep following the cables like that. So you keep going further up and further up in the tree, further up the grapevine, until you eventually locate the problem, of course. Alright, so let's move on to the next topic. Pretty much the same deal, except this time it's about troubleshooting wireless issues. So previously it was about wired cables, in other words. And this is wireless, so there's no cables involved. So if someone's wireless does not want to work, very first thing you can go and do is verify configuration. Now in reality this actually includes a lot of things, but let's keep it simple for now. I would say start off by verifying your network name and the SSID. It's pretty much the same thing. So the SSID is the name of the wireless network you want to connect to. In other words, the hotspot you want to connect to. Verify the name is correct, because maybe this person is connecting to the wrong wireless network or trying to connect to the wrong wireless network. Verify support for Wi-Fi or 802.11 standard. So maybe this device, this phone, tablet, laptop, or whatever it's trying to connect, maybe it doesn't have support for Wi-Fi. It's not able to connect to Wi-Fi. This could just be because it never supported it to begin with. It could be because the Wi-Fi card has blown or is damaged. It could be because the card has been disabled. It could be a lot of things, guys. It could be that it's not compatible anymore. It could be that it's outdated. The list is very long, guys. And when it comes to 802.11 standard, that means the frequency. So maybe you're trying to connect to a frequency that's not supported by that card. You're trying to connect to 802.11g, and this device only supports 802.11a. It's possible, but it's extremely unlikely these days. All wireless cards support all wireless standards. So I wouldn't worry about that part so much. Check low radio frequency strength. It could be that the strength is just freaking low. In other words, maybe you are just out of reach. If you take your laptop, cell phone, tablet, or whatever this device is far enough away from an access point or a router, you're going to find the signal obviously gets weaker and weaker, and at some point in time it's just going to disconnect, or just nothing's going to load. It could be that. So check signal strength and check for flapping between access points. Some big networks, like an office networks, has multiple access points that broadcast the same network. Now when you or the user move from one part of the office to another part of the office, your device could potentially be disconnecting from one access point and reconnecting to another. It'll work, but it's a bit of a time delay, and certain things is not going to work the way it's supposed to. It's not going to load the way it's supposed to. So instead, you get a new technology these days, and believe it or not, this is actually not part of this course. They will not ask you this in the exam. you get these new mesh networks. So it's still multiple access points, but they're seen as the same. So you might have 3 access points, but all 3 of them are seen as the same access point. So when you or the user now move around in your home or your office network, it's not going to go and disconnect from the one or the other one. You can think of this as cell phone towers. If you're driving around on a car, and obviously at some point you're going to be further and further away from one tower and closer and closer to another tower, the phone call doesn't suddenly drop and then reconnect every time you go farther and further away from one tower and get closer to another one. It automatically just passes the phone call on from one cell phone tower to another cell phone tower. So these access points, these mesh access points in your home, work very much actually in the same manner, guys. Pretty damn cool, I must say. And then also just move closer to the access point. So if the signal is weak, just, you know what, just move the person closer to the access point. And if that's not possible, maybe just add extra access points maybe. Wireless signal issues, if there's something wrong with the actual signal itself, scan for channel overlaps with other wireless LANs. There's a possibility there's other access points that may be broadcasting on the same wireless channel. That is possible, guys, and it's actually a very common scenario. And assess the environment for potential interference sources. There's lots of devices out there that actually broadcast on the same frequency. So the average wireless network is 802.11g, and 802.11g runs at a frequency of 2.4 gigahertz. That is actually one of the most common frequencies out there. A lot of wireless devices broadcast on that exact same frequency. For example, cordless phones. I'm not talking about cell phones. Those cordless phones that's got like a telephone cable that plugs into the charging base, and then if you want to make a phone call, receive a phone call, you can just pick up the phone, but it actually transmits wirelessly to the charging base. Those are running at 2.4 gigahertz. Baby monitors run at 2.4 gigahertz, and I kid you not, microwave ovens. Now if it's just plugged into the wall and the LCD display is on, that doesn't do anything. As soon as you actually heat something up and that magnetron starts running, it emits a frequency, or it interferes with the frequency of 2.4. You can actually go and try it. I guarantee you, you'll see it's going to mess around. So you don't want your access point router near that, or you don't want the laptop or the receiving device near that. Ideally not. All right, folks, moving on to our last topic here. That would be troubleshoot limited connectivity. So what this one is all about is basically when you or a user experience some sort of notification on a machine like a laptop or a desktop that says you've got a limited connectivity. So if you're on a laptop and you're on wireless, it might be at the little Wi-Fi icon at the bottom right next to your system clock. It might have some sort of exclamation mark on that little Wi-Fi bar that says limited or no internet. If you are on an Ethernet cable, it might be the little computer icon, same location though, and it might basically show you the same little notification. So this is normally an indication that something is not right, something is not working. It's up to you, obviously, to figure out what that something is. This could, honest to God, be something like the physical link is not operational because IP configuration is faulty. So maybe the machine is not in the same subnet. Maybe the IP range is just configured incorrectly because we are all human. Maybe this machine is coming from a different network for all we know. The point I'm trying to make here is it really could just be an IP configuration that's misconfigured. Something in there is not correct. It could also be a matter of static versus automatic IP addressing. So maybe this machine is supposed to have a static IP and it's got dynamic. Maybe it's got a dynamic IP address and it's supposed to have a static IP address. For those of you that don't know or don't remember, a static IP address is something you configure manually on a machine. And if you or someone configures that, it'll stay like that until someone comes and configures it one day. So static IP is also known as a fixed IP or a manual IP. An automatic IP, which is also known as a dynamic IP address, is what most devices are configured on by default. And if this device is on a network, let's say it's got a cable plugged in, or it's connected to some sort of wireless network, if it is unable to get an IP address over the network for whatever reason, because this is what dynamic means. Dynamic means it's going to ask for an IP over the network from some sort of DHCP, assuming, of course, one is available. So if it's unable to get an IP address, you will have what we call an APIPA address. So I'm going to write it here in pink on the right for you guys. So there's the word APIPA. And if you go check what your IP address is, so if you go into command prompt and you go and type in ipconfig, you will find that you've got a 169.254.something.something. The last two octets will be random, but the first two octets will always be 169.254. At first glance, that might look like an IP address to you guys, but I assure you it is not. If you see you've got a 169.254, that means you or this user or this device has got what we call a pipa. That means this device is on dynamic, and it means it's unable to get an IP address. Why it's unable to get one, we don't know. The list of things it could be is very, very long, guys, and that's obviously where you come into play. We need to go and test why it's not getting an IP. This could be really just a matter of the cable is plugged out. Maybe it's disconnected from the Wi-Fi. Maybe the DHCP is offline. Maybe it's down for maintenance. Maybe there's something wrong on the network. It can be a lot of things. But at least when you see you've got a 169, at least then you know that is why you're not able to connect anything on a network, because you don't actually have an IP address, guys. Other issues when it comes to troubleshooting limited connectivity is establishing a scope of network problems. So when you, a user, a client, or a customer, or just quite frankly something random on network is not working, I would say one of the first things you need to try and do here is try and figure out the extent of the problem. Is it just one device or just one user? Or does it extend further than one device or one user? So is it a single host, or is it maybe multiple hosts? It extends beyond that, maybe up to the switch or the router. So if more than one person is complaining about the same issue at the exact same time, that is normally a key indicator that this is not just one host. It is something that's affecting all of them. So it's most likely pointless for you to go and check on the hosts themselves. You're going to have to go and check further than that. Check if the host or hosts, if it's more than one, can access only the local network, or if they can access the internet as well. So can they access the internet? Can they not? Can they access the local network or not? So depending on how far their reach is and what they can and cannot access, that also might be a bit of an indicator as to how far this problem actually extends in your network. Lastly, guys, in this topic, verify which local network host is in. So what I mean by that is check your connection to the switch. Check if it's the correct switch that you or the user is actually plugged into. And if you find it is the correct switch, go and check if it's the correct port. This might sound weird to some of you guys, because you might think to yourself, okay, cool, I am plugged into the right switch and it is on, so why could that be possibly a problem? While switches have what we call virtual LANs, guys. Now, if you don't know what that is, that was actually discussed in the previous module. If memory serves, I think that was actually discussed in the previous module, module 5. It was like one of the last topics. So if you don't know what that is, or if you did not watch the previous module, maybe go check out module 5 on my channel. I think one of the last topics in that video is VLANs, where we actually explain what VLANs is. But a quick recap, just because you see a physical switch there, and just because you and a bunch of other devices are plugged into the same switch, that does not necessarily mean you are on the same network. So physically, yes. Digitally speaking, not necessarily, because some of these switches, the more expensive ones, we call them managed switches. That means you can log into it and you can actually go and create what we call virtual LANs. So we will be using the same physical infrastructure, but we will in fact be on digital different LANs. So we're plugged into the same switch using the same network cables, but you and me can be on entirely different LANs, digitally speaking, different networks. Pretty interesting, right? So if you would like to know more about that, feel free to go and check out that specific video on my channel, guys. Alrighty, we've reached that point of the video, folks, so thank you very much for watching the video up until this point. If you've been watching up until this point, let me know in the comment section down below what you thought of the drawing part of this video. I think this is the second video that I've been doing with drawings in them. So if you like that, let me know if it works for you or not, so I know if I need to do more of that or less of that. So yeah, just once again, guys, thank you very much for watching. Give the video a like if you haven't done so already. It does get this video in front of more people that actually need it. If you'd like to know when I release other content, obviously the usual subscribe, blah, blah, blah. And before you all disappear, obviously we need to go and thank all the sponsors of this channel. So I just want to give a special shout out to the Patreon sponsors, the guys that's been sponsoring via PayPal, those of you that's been buying me coffee or milkshakes, and also those of you that's been clicking on the thanks button below the videos. All of those are very appreciated. So guys, here is some of the PayPal and Patreon sponsors. Thank you very much, guys. I appreciate it a lot. And if any of you guys would like to sponsor the channel in some sort of way, you can also find that information in the video description down below. Alright folks, I shall see you in Module 7 of the CompTIA A+ course.